If you have Excel 2016 and more recent, you probably don't have the text import wizard enabled, and you probably have to use Power Query. So I'll show you how to do it, and it is highly recommended. So on the Data tab, get data from File, from Text CSV, which the wind tracker data is, and most data is at some basic form, comma separated values. You navigate to the folder, and when you download your data, it usually will give you a default name, hopefully involving the date and time of beginning to end. And when you open a CSV file this way in Excel Power Query, it opens up in this dialog box, which lets you either immediately, if you're totally happy with this, lets you immediately load it to an Excel table or transform the data. I like transforming the data and entering this window. Even if I don't end up doing very much with the data, it's a really good way to make sure the columns are of the data types that you want, especially. So I go and take a look at the end, and so the data types in this Power Query window. Now you don't have to do anything in this Power Query window, but it provides you with a way of documenting your steps, especially if you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again every time you download data. What the Power Query window does for you is basically builds you a script. And I highly recommend that you stick with us and take part in some of our data management work using Power Query, because it's really powerful and can help you. And then the idea is that you have this script that you can reuse every time you get data in this exact same format, and automatically append data to the end of your giant data table and expand your tables and your charts. So at the end, we've got latitude and longitude, which are in decimal form, and that's fine. We have AQI, which, as you could see, sometimes has one decimal and sometimes is an integer. So Excel said, okay, that's decimal format. PM 2.5, the same thing. We sometimes have decimal, so that's great. And then all these times have this icon here at the top, which is date time. Now, if you wanted to change the data type, you could say, if Excel didn't recognize this as a date time, you could force it here, or you could apply these other data types. So Excel properly interpreted this as date time. We don't need to worry about the format of this at all. I just want to point out one thing, which is that if you round or truncate in this Power Query window, it's not like Excel that keeps the underlying value and just changes the display of it to you to be rounded. This actually changes your data. So I don't recommend rounding yet unless you really have to or it makes sense for the data type. So close and load here, and we have the option of closing and loading it, which takes it just to an Excel table, or close and load to, and we'll talk about that in another data management session, but you have the option of closing and loading it to just a connection if you actually didn't want this as a table yet, but wanted to query from it. And that kind of thing can be important, especially as you start to accrue a lot of data. We're going to just say close and load, and what that means is it just puts it into an Excel table. Now, the cool thing about this is that if I were to change that data file that this is pulling from, this would refresh. So now, since you've created this query, you see it over here in queries and connections. Now, if you don't see that, you need to enable the view by going to data and queries and connections. And if you uncheck that, it goes away if you want to see your whole screen. And you could see that if you wanted to edit this, you could double click on it, or you could hover over it and say edit. Say if you wanted to change a data type, it would totally refresh then this table once you clicked refresh. So at this point, we're finished importing it. We want to just take a quick look at some of these values and make sure they look okay. Great. So now what do we want to do? First of all, I'm really only interested in local start time. So I'm going to start to look at this, and I can see that the data were gathered every minute. So that's going to look like a weird chart every minute. So what I want to do first is create a pivot table. So a pivot table enables us to summarize, like summarize by hour or summarize by day, super easily in Excel. So I'm going to show you that in the next video.